The materials and supplies are listed on page 2 of the pattern, and I will go over that now. The fabric requirements are based on 42-inch wide fabric. You will need a half yard of each. For this bag, I will be using, for the exterior, this paisley print. For the interior lining, I'll be using this light peach color. The fusible interfacing I'm using is medium weight. And you also need the foam, which gives it a nice feel and structure to the bag. I do recommend that you pre-wash your fabrics before cutting. This removes any chemicals and also tests for shrinkage and fabric bleeding, and your interfacing will adhere better. Let's move on to the hardware. The hardware you're going to need is a magnetic snap with the washers. You'll need 2 connectors, a slider. You'll need strapping that measures 63 inches in length, and it should be the same width as your hardware. I suggest a 1.5 inch width. You will also need a 7-inch zipper that would be measuring metal to metal, or a 8.5 inch zipper tape. I will be using zipper tape on my bag, and I've cut that to 8.5 inches. I've put on my pull already, and I have also tacked down the ends of the zipper so it will not open up while I'm handling the zipper. Another item you might want to add to your bag is a brand label or any type of label that you might want to put on the outside or the inside of your bag. I will be using my brand label, the Nancy Steer brand label. You're going to need some tools and notions to complete this project. You will need the needles for your machine, your thread, bobbin. Wind up your bobbin full on, especially when you're going to do top stitching. We need a zipper foot. I use a narrow one. These are my fabric scissors. These I cut paper with. I never use these on paper, so have a general pair of scissors that you can use for cutting out your patterns, maybe cutting out a plastic zipper. You'll need a seam ripper, some marking tools. I go between 2 items. I use chalk, and I also use these Frixion pens. This is an erasable pen that with heat from an iron, the marks go away. So that's a very helpful tool. I like to work with a pin cushion that I strap onto my wrist, so I have my pins handy. And if I don't want it on my wrist, I just set it next to me. So have your pins ready. And you'll also need some clips. These are the famous Clover clips. I've got a little box that I keep next to me while I'm working, and also transfer this around to my machine back and forth. And another clip I like to use is, I picked these up in a beauty supply house. It's just a hair clip. It's flat. They really work nice for pinning around the edges. You'll see that in the video. So get some clips ready. Make sure you have your favorite ruler handy. I like to work with this small one for marking where snaps and things are going. I have larger ones as well, but this is pretty much my go-to ruler. Not necessary, but you could add some nippers. Scissors will do the job. No need to go out and spend extra money unless you are building up your sewing case. Then you might want to little by little start adding some extra items in. I also like to use this edge stitch pressure foot, and it's a really handy tool. It locks in on the edge of something, and it keeps everything flowing really nice and straight. I'm probably going to be using this quite a bit in this tutorial. Another little extra that I have is this magnetic seam guide. It just goes onto my machine on top of the metal plate. It's magnified and it does not budge. So it's really, have to look at those very narrow lines that are engraved on the plates. You can just snap this on where the line is, and it gives you a perfect guide. Another extra you might want to add is something that can turn out corners on the bag. Generally, you can use your finger. This is a little bit helpful if you need just a little bit help going around round edges. And another little extra that I use is this double-sided tape. I use it mainly for zippers. This is a 1/4 inch, and I find this very helpful. I'll add a link under the video. This I got from Sailrite. and they have a lot of nice items on their website. So this is the double-sided tape. And the other thing that I sometimes, one of my go-to tools, again, not required for this project, is rotary cutters, depending on what I'm making, how I'm cutting, if I'm drafting. So these are also other useful tools. This Olfa is pretty much my go-to, and I use this Fiskars when I'm making my large duffel bags, or if I'm doing a massive assembly of like a massive production, I'll use this one. So that's what you need in the way of tools. Let's continue on and start with the pattern. By now you should have printed out your pattern and read through it. This is a very important step, and the project will go smoother because you're familiar with the steps that are listed on page 1. So please take a look and read through that, and actually read through the whole pattern. But before you do that, you need to make sure you print it out accurately. So once you download the pattern, open up the file in your computer and go to page 3 and print that page only. Print page 3. And once that prints out, measure this square. Make sure this measures 1 inch by 1 inch. If not, make sure you follow the instructions that it says here until you get that right. You'll probably have it right the first time. But it's very important you do that, because the size of the pattern pieces could then be off, and which will result in the size of the bag being off. So go ahead and get your pattern ready. Read through it if you haven't done that already. Look at the diagrams. Go through the steps, so you have a good understanding of how that's going to be, and it's all going to go together perfectly well with this tutorial. So let's get to that point, and now we are ready to move on farther with the pattern pieces. Go ahead and prepare the pattern pieces by cutting around the edges. Use regular scissors for this step, very important. And I have a clip following this showing you how I do that step. So go ahead and get the pattern pieces ready. All right, so now we are going to get our patterns ready, our pattern pieces. Now that we've printed out the pattern pieces, we need to get them cut out. And I just want to make sure I've got my one inch square, and I do, so I can start to cut this out. I'm doing my bag with the round corners, so if you are doing that as well, you can skip the front pocket that has the square corners. I really prefer the round. I like the look of the bag much better with round corners. So it's up to you, whatever you want to use. And what you're going to do is just cut around the pattern pieces, get them ready, and you'll just do this on all of them. Just keep cutting them out, working the way around, working around the corners, and then once you have them cut out, then just follow what it says you need. For example, on this front pocket, we'll need a main fabric, a lining fabric, a interfacing, and one foam. So basically 4 pieces of this one. And just continue cutting these out. I'm not going to waste your time by watching me cut all them out. Just follow what I was doing. And inside the pattern, when you get to the piece that's the front and back, you'll be taping 2 pieces together. And then you can lay it on the fold of the fabric to cut it out. I like to duplicate this page, ignore the fold line, tape it together, and then I'm just working with one big piece that I lay down on the piece of fabric. And I also find it helpful. I have a really heavy cast iron weight, and when I put this on top of the fabric, I like to weigh it down with this weight so it doesn't shift. And then sometimes I'll just like push it to this end and start tracing around the pattern like that, following what the instructions say. And other times I'll just look up what the size of it is and use a ruler and just draft it without even using the pattern piece. I'll just draft it out with the ruler, and that's also a fast method to getting it drawn out. So it's up to you however you want to do it. So let's get to that. Get everything cut out, the patterns cut out, get your fabrics cut out, get all that cut out, and we'll meet back here. I already have mine ready. Additionally to that, you're going to need to cut out these reinforcements. There are 4 little pieces of fabrics. It's listed on the pattern, so just follow when you get to that step. We're going to use these for the magnetic snap. So please get all of your pieces ready, and then we can now move on to page 7 of the pattern and start with step 1, fuse the interfacing. Okay, we are now on step 1, fusing the interfacing. This is on page 7 of the pattern. I have already done that on my pieces. The reason why this is a different color is because I decided not to use the lining color when you open up the flap on my bag. Mine is going to be a colored piece, so when you open up the bag, you're going to see the color. So I have all my pieces ready with the interfacing onto the lining. And now what we'll be able to do is move on to step 2 and attach the foam. I've organized my pieces so that I have the pattern piece together with the foam piece that it needs to be sewed onto. What you're going to need to do is add some pins all the way around to keep it together, and then sew around the complete outline of each piece with a 1/8 seam allowance. And so I'm going to go put my pins on, go to the machine, and then meet you back here. For this step, we're going to attach the magnetic snap to the flap lining piece. That won't be any of the pieces that have foam on it. So get out your flap lining piece. This is mine. Yours probably is the same color as your lining. Again, I chose to do mine the same as the exterior of the bag. And you'll be using the male piece, which is the thinner piece of the snap, this one here. And we're going to need to make some markings on the piece of fabric. So what you need to do is fold the piece of fabric in half to get a light crease mark, and then you're going to mark the center with a fabric pen on the lower edge. There's my center. Once you have your center, you're going to measure from the center mark up 1 1/4 inches and make a dot. We're going to do this more than once because we're going to be covering up with one of those reinforcement pieces. So now what you want to do is take one of those little 2x2 pieces that we prepared, the reinforcement pieces. You're going to place it over, center it over the dot, and press it on. Once you press that on, we're going to repeat the measurement going up 1 1/4 inches to the center and make a dot. So get to that point and we'll continue on. Okay, all right, now I have this ready. Now you should be on page 8 of the pattern instructions. We have the reinforcement piece adhered on, and then I found my center again and I measured up 1 1/4 inches. So now we're ready to start working with the actual pieces of the snap. You're going to take the metal disc guard that comes with the snap and lay it down over that dot Straighten it out as much as you can, and then mark inside those slots, okay? At that point, now is when we're gonna use our seam ripper, and what you're gonna wanna do is we're gonna go inside, we're gonna poke through, and we're gonna make a small slit. The smaller is better. We just want the prongs of this to be able to fit through. So don't cut end to end. Just make a little bit. You can always open it up later. So I'm gonna open that up on each, just poke through. And I'm gonna force this up just a little bit. I could feel that it moved up a bit. And then I'm gonna do it in the other slit. Staying inside the line, poking through. And I'm just gonna push it up a little bit so I can feel those threads tearing. And from that point, now we're ready to put this on. So turn your piece, well, first of all, I think I'll try to push these through where I can see where the lines are on this end. There's one poked through, and now I'm poke the other one through, that poked through as well, chalk on there. Okay, now take the washer and put that on top of the prongs, and you're gonna need something to push that down with. I don't have my screwdriver next to me. Press it down nice and tight. And then we are going to take another reinforcement piece and press it on top of everything we just did. That kind of protects the inside of your bag. So let's press that down and we'll continue. Okay, my piece is ready, and I'm just testing the corners. They're pretty stuck down. I just want to mention to you, when you press this on, I don't rub the iron across the actual metal snap. I just press on this side, and then I press here, and I hold up the iron down for a bit and press there, just on the edge of the iron. So that's a good method to use to get that adhered really nice. Okay, so we've got that done, and now we're gonna move on, and we are gonna make the flap. What you're gonna need for this step is the exterior flap piece, this is mine, and the lining flap piece with the right sides together. This is my lining flap piece, the piece that you just put the snap on. You can see in the diagram when you lay these two together, you're gonna see this on the top. So you're gonna need to pin these together, and we're gonna sew them with a 3/8 seam allowance, starting on the top right corner, and we're gonna work all the way down until we reach this top left corner. Remember to backstitch at your start and stop positions, but leave this edge, the top, open. So let's go ahead and put that together and continue on. We're not sewing across the top, so I can put lots of clips in here, and I won't be removing these right now. I'm just using them to hold everything together, and it reminds me not to go there. So just stick in some pins in the other corners. I'll stick in a few more for this tutorial, but a lot of times I won't need that many. I'll just hold down the ends. So let's get to stitching. 3/8 inch, go all the way around, don't stitch on the top. All right, now we're just gonna sew around the sides to get the flap attached piece to piece. I've changed my thread out now I am going to use this beige because I'll be top stitching with that, and I think you already understand what I meant with the foam, how to do that. Here's the red here. So I'm just going to continue on with the regular thread that I'm going to be using for this bag. So let's get going. Okay, how did that go? For me, truthfully, I had to rip something out, but I fixed it. My corner was a little bit off, and since it's rounded, I really needed that to be perfect, and I was going too fast. So just to mention, don't hurry while you're doing this. Take your time, and that's the price you pay. I had to rip out some stitches. Now we're gonna clip the corners outside of the stitching line. Make sure you don't catch your stitching line. And we're gonna trim the seams to reduce the bulk. We're still on page 9, so I'm just gonna cut this down a bit, and then we're gonna flip this around. We're gonna turn it and then do some top stitching. I am rushing. I have to stop rushing. So continue to just go all the way around. You get the idea. Okay. Just missing a little piece there. All right, so we cut off those corners and we trimmed around, and now we are going to turn the right side out and push out the corners. I always do that with my fingers first. This looks a little too pointy for a round corner, but I will see on that. And turn this one out as well. Turn out your piece. This is when I like to use this little tool. I'm not going to push in the corner. I'm just going to rub it along the side. This helps because we're also going to be pressing, so I'm going to just push it along the side there. And that helps too. I can use this other rounder edge to get into here in my corner, my round corner, to give it a little better shape. I'm liking how that's looking. This is going to be the outside. I did go with this because it just happened to have something almost centered there. So I went with that. Okay, we've got this flipped around. Now once the flap looks really nice and even, you're going to give it a good pressing, and then we're going to baste the upper raw edge here with we're going to close this up with a 1/2 centimeter seam allowance, so it won't be seen when we're attaching the flap later on. Okay, so let's get up to that point. Right now you're still on page 9, and then we're going to continue on with the optional feature to add some top stitching. I think I'm going to go for that. I did it on this bag, the first one I did, and I do like it that you can see here where it's finished off it better with the top stitching. Before I stitched it, it didn't look that fit. It looked to me like it was missing something, so I'm going to go with the top stitching. So let's get to that point and we'll continue on. So there, it's nice and flat pressed. I'm going to run my stitching down here. that 5 centimeter, half a centimeter. And half a centimeter is just a little bit narrower than 1/4 of an inch. So that's what I'm going to do on this. And then I'm gonna go ahead and do the top stitching. And for that, I think I am going to use this other foot that I spoke about in earlier on with the tools that we went over. So let's do that and keep moving forward. All right, let's get this closed up. You know, I sew with a big magnifying glass, and I know it's getting in the way a little bit. I'm sorry about that, but I just love sewing with that. It's so easy on the eyes and magnifies it. So sorry if it's in the way a little bit. Okay, it also has a very bright light, and I love that as well. It's so easy on the eyes. It saves you from a lot of sewing fatigue. All right, so let's close this top up. Okay, so now we are ready to do the top stitching. If you don't want to do it now, you can do it in a few steps further on if you want more time to think about it. I'm going to do mine now, and that'll give you a chance to see what it looks like. And I'm going to flip out to a different foot. I'm going to use this edging foot, which, if you can see, over here, there's a piece of metal that extends down, so my fabric is going to be pushed against there as I'm sewing. This is going to be pushed against there, which is nice, so I'll get an even stitch along the edge. Even though this is already sewed together, I rolled it back to make sure that I have a nice line across here, and I stuck in some some clips to hold it together. I think I'm calling these pins because they're hair pins. That's what they call them. So if I say it again, you know what I mean. So let's continue here. I'm going to get this onto the machine. I'm going to check my width. I think I'm going to move over. I don't know if you can see my needle. That's about at 1/4 of an inch. I think that will sew pretty nicely. I'm just going to check a measurement real quick. I will be sewing this at 1/4 inch. That's what I did on the other bag, and it looks pretty nice. And I'm changing my stitch length to 4. I'm finding that the 4 actually is a good length for all of this, what I'm doing right now, except for the zipper. That'll be different. But anyhow, let's keep going and get this trim done. And go very slow when you do this. Okay, I have closed the top of the flap, and I've done the top stitching around the edge. It feels really nice. It looks really nice. On the bag, it's going to look something like this, because this extends over the top of the bag, and then the bag, the face of it begins right about here where I've got this print. So I think this is gonna be pretty nice. So that's it on the flap. And what we're gonna do now, remember you can do your top stitching further on. There's still another chance. I'm feeling the snap down here a little bit. And I think on the next portion, when we do the pocket, I think I'm gonna fold the prongs out and see how that feels. The reason being is this fabric I chose is a little bit thin, the main one. When you use a canvas, you don't feel that as much. Anyhow, let's continue on. Let's keep moving forward with the bag. We are on page 10, and we are going to set the flap aside for now. So grab your snap and the washer, and we'll continue on. What we need to do is measure again, so for the disc placement hole. So this time we're measuring from the top, because the flap here is going to get attached at that point, like that, as you see on this bag. Right now we're gonna do this. We're gonna make this pocket, and we're also attaching the snap, and the snap has to go on first, and then we're gonna assemble the rest of this pocket. So that's what we're working on right now. If you see here, we put this one towards the bottom so it can meet up with this one. So this one's gonna go towards the top. Basically, it's the same as we did before. We're going to fold you can go back to step 3 and repeat what it says. Just pay careful attention that the mark you make is 1 3/4 inches from the top raw edge to the center of the snap. So let's begin with that. Again, we are going to fold this in half. Then you're going to make your mark, measure down. We'll also be putting on the reinforcement. So go ahead, go back to step 3, do that process. Just make sure your distance from here to here, the middle of the snap, that little hole mark you're gonna make is 1 3/4 inch. Go ahead and finish that step, and we will continue on. Okay, now that we have our snap on the front pocket, there's another step that we need to move forward. We're going to be building the pocket now. And what you will need to do at this point, you're going to need to stitch a line across the top below the raw edge at a distance of 1 centimeter. You'll do that on your interior pocket piece and on the outside pocket piece. In the diagram, they're shown like this with the little snap here. So go ahead and do that. I've already done mine. I'm just going to clean up my edges here a little bit. And then what we need to do is take these pieces, and where you have that stitching line, use that as a guide. Fold on that stitching line. Fold on that line. Do the same with this piece. Fold that over. Keep following the pattern, what they're telling you to do, what it's telling you to do. And the next step is you're going to place these together, right sides together, and you're going to stitch this down. This will also be folded over. Get them both folded over. Look at the diagrams in the pattern. That's very helpful. And follow the instructions and stitch that down. Once we do that, we will be trimming the corners and reducing the bulk, and we'll be turning the pocket right side out, pushing out the corners, and then we'll be finishing with a little top stitching. So let's get through those steps and keep moving forward. Some of this you could just do it with finger pressing. Just follow the stitch line. That's what I'm doing. I'm going to just bend it down, fold it over on that stitching line to keep that in place. And then I'll do the same one on here. I'm using thread that matches very well, so it's kind of hard to see my stitching line. Whoops. It's kind of hard to see my stitching line, but it's right here. And I'm just gonna fold down on there I'm folding it over and just going to drop in some of these clips. I'll fold it over on. This will help to put these two pieces together. I'm going to readjust some of these clips here. I want the top to be very well aligned. Down here, you're not going to notice it so much. Mine's off a little bit. Put in some more clips to hold it together. Right now we're making this piece. It's the front of the pocket and the lining. We're just attaching them together. Now that I have that all pinned in place, I turned it over. I'd rather sew this with my lining piece, the wrong side facing up. You can see here that I'm a little bit off, but you won't notice that, and it will get caught within the seam allowance when we sew it. So now what you need to do, keep all this nice and laid out flat, is add some clips on the sides to hold it together so you can get to the sewing machine and stitch this down. So I'm going to just pop in some clips here along the edge of this. Just get your clips in place, and it is going to look nice even though I'm off a little bit. I try to be perfect, but who is? So now it's pretty much tacked down, and I can pick this up and get to my sewing machine and start to sew. So we're going to start at the top right hand corner here, 3/8 inch stitch, and keep that going all the way. Once we flip it, it's going to look great. So let's do that. Start here, back stitch, follow all the way along 3/8 of an inch, and end up in this other corner and back stitch there. Take your time, go slow. This isn't a race, and the more patience you have, the better it's going to turn out. Remembering to backstitch. This isn't feeding in. I use this little tool here. I've been wanting to use this. Okay, let's see if this helps. And it does. This is a cuticle pusher. Okay, that went pretty well. Now I can remove the clips. Go ahead and remove your clips and trim up any loose ends that you're seeing. If you want to keep it a little bit cleaner, you can go ahead and snip off any extra threads that are there. I think this is going to be good. Now what we want to do is don't cut these corners. We want those. So don't trim those corners as we usually do. I'm just going to trim a little bit down here so I can get a nice shape when we turn out the pocket. Just going to trim this down a little bit. I can always trim off more after I turn it and see if I like what it's looking like. Okay, so now I want to get rid of any little threads that can pop out after we turn this. I think we can turn it now. So let's turn the pocket right side out and push out the corners, and we will press it flat. So be gentle with that, the corners, and gently lay it flat and push that out. See if you think you need to trim off. So go ahead and turn it inside out, which will now be right side out. And here's a little thread that needs to go. Smooth it out in the inside. This is looking cute. I like it. And this is our little top edge. That looks pretty good. So let's go to the ironing board and give it a nice pressing. Might need to push out my one lower corner down here a little bit. Run it along the edge. I might need to trim off a little more of the bulk on the inside of that corner. I think I'm going to do that. I'm feeling like I need to do that so that lays a little better. So I'm going to go back. Now is the time to make any corrections that you see. We want to make it nice, and it's this here. This has a little bit of that stitching when we attach the foam, and I think probably the best thing for me to do is just eliminate that down there without cutting my stitches. I still have room here, and I think that I will need to trim just a tad. And you do the same. Take a look at it, turn it inside out, which would be right side out, and trim off anything that you think is getting in the way of this laying flat. Being careful with the stitching. Don't get too close there when you're trimming, and don't push too hard when you're pushing out those corners, because you might go through one of those stitches. You might break one. So be gentle there. Be gentle. Handle with care. Okay. Now that's looking better. Now just need to trim that off a little bit. You can roll these corners, and you just want to get it all laying really, really nice for our next step. And let's go give this a nice pressing. This corner looks a little bit funny, but I think it's because it has this design right here, this little piece of blue. I think gives it a little bit of an illusion. I'm going to go with it like that. I'm going to go to the ironing board and press this out. Okay, now we have it nice and pressed. I have mine nice and pressed. You should have yours nice and pressed. And it's looking pretty good. I think it's gonna be looking pretty good. This is gonna go onto the front of the bag. And you know, using a print, it's a little bit forgiving. Once this gets stitched around and it's sewed on straight, I still feel like this corner looks a little bit not perfect, but maybe I'm just being too picky. So let's keep moving on. The only thing we need to do now to finish this part of the tutorial on this pocket is to finish the top edge here. We're going to finish this top edge by edge stitching 1/8 of an inch from the top edge. So I'm gonna slide over to my machine and do that right now, very carefully and very slowly. All right, we are going to sew the edge closed. I broke a couple nails recently, so I decided to take off my polish, but we keep going. Now, I'm gonna stick something behind here because my foot is dropping. If I'm not able to get across this thick part, I might change to a walking foot. I might need to use this. So I'll attempt this first without changing that. Hopefully I can get through these stitches, the thickness. And I think I'm gonna hand crank this a little bit to get it started. And it went in. I'll go one more forward, and now I'm gonna crank it back to the end. And I'm going to place this in again and move forward as if I was back stitching. I want to clear that thick area. I've cleared it, and now I'm going to take out a little bit of my pins, and I'm going to go very slow and careful. Okay, we've completed the pocket. Now we can move on to attaching the pocket to the body of the bag. You can take both of your pieces, your front and back, and see which one you like better. Even though I have this large paisley here, I don't mind if it gets covered up. I kind of like having all this busy design there, and then this will be my back piece. So I'm going to go with that one. And what you're going to want to do is we need to get this pocket in position. The position you need is going to be centered. You'll need to center it and have it starting at 7 centimeters from the raw edge. Okay, I'm at the machine. I have my settings at 1/4 of an inch, and I'm just going to slide in this little plate in the back because of the thickness. I want to make sure that my foot doesn't collapse in the back. And we will begin. Back stitch at the beginning, and I will probably be cranking around the corners. we've gotten that far now. We've got the pocket attached, and my measurements here are equal. Just to double check the measurements, what you can do is take your flap and snap it on, and just see that your measurements here are lining up properly. Mine looks pretty good. I think we are good to go. On to the next step. We will now make the zipper pocket. This is starting to look somewhat like a bag taking shape. This will be the front. So let's keep going, and we'll get to step 8 now, making the zipper pocket. In this step, you'll be working with the back exterior piece that doesn't have the pocket on it, and also the 2 pieces of the lining of the zipper pocket, which are 9" by 5½. What you'll need to do is take one piece of the pocket lining, place it on top of your back panel, find your center, and make a mark down 1¼ inch from the top edge of the fabric, centered. Follow along with the pattern on this step that is starting on page 12, and we will continue on at this point. You should have your pocket lining piece placed 3½ inches from the top of the raw edge, in line and centered. And you'll be placing this again on the right side of the body piece, the back of the bag. So the right sides will be touching, and pin it securely in place so it doesn't move while you get to your sewing machine. Now we're going to need to mark a box on here. Add in your pin so that it's tacked down very securely. And now what we're going to need to do is we're going to go to the machine, and we're going to stitch right along our marks here, keeping the stitches the same length here. Very important, the same distance. So go ahead and sew a box around that. And you might need to adjust your stitch length a little bit to get right exactly into the corners. Very important that these are even, because you're going to see that on the outside of the bag. You're going to see this distance here. There is a little bit of margin for error. Just go slow, as always. So let's get to that point. Go ahead and go to the machine and stitch around the box. I'm going to use about a 2½ stitch length, and on my foot there's a little groove here where I can see through to the fabric, and I've chosen to put my needle to the left so I can line up the markings with that groove. So let's get that far. So around the box, remember to back stitch. All right, that worked out pretty good. I felt like the 2½ stitch length worked pretty well. Now we are going to move on. This is secured now, so we can take the pins out. Now, following the diagram on the pattern, what we need to do is we are going to draw into this box. We're going to make a line going down the center, stopping at a ½ inch, and then we'll make 2 diagonal lines. Once you have your lines drawn, now we're going to cut into this fabric. What we're going to do is crimp into the center area between the lines that we just stitched, and then we're going to cut almost to the corner. Be careful you don't cut through your stitches. To get it started, you can poke through with your seam ripper and then take some scissors and get that cut exactly. Now push the pocket lining through the opening to the reverse side. And steam press the box carefully to get the perfect shape. Okay, now that your piece is nice and pressed, it should be looking like this, like you have a little rectangle window there. I'm going to put a piece of paper under here so it's more visible on camera. So now we have our rectangle. This is now ready for us to put the zipper on. So what you're going to need to do is turn your piece of fabric over. You might want to use some of that double-sided tape, a 1/4 inch. I think I am going to do that. And place your zipper on top face down. So your piece is face down and the zipper is going to go face down. With the part that has the zipper pull on it, line that up on the right. You're going to line that up on the right and you need to secure this down. So this is what it's going to look like from the right side of the bag. It's going to look like this. So go ahead and get that secured in place. I'm going to use my double-sided tape to help me with this. To make this step a little bit easier, what you can do now is shift your pins, make them a little bit farther from the distance where you're going to be sewing. Go ahead and stick in some pins farther away from where you'll be stitching, but respect that pressed area that you have. That will help. Okay, I'm going to show you how I do this with using the zipper tape. I've used my roll of 1/4 inch zipper tape and I've laid a piece on each end of my zipper. What I intend to do is I'm going to take off one of these strips and I'm going to peel off one strip and then I'm going to do this face up and press the first one into place, and then I'll take off my other strip, I'll peel it back here, and then I'll place this other one down. Well, to me looks pretty even. Okay, now I need to be very careful on the next one. I need my zipper pull to be there. I think once those stitches are down, it should look pretty good. It's secured. This is secured on. Love that zipper tape. So now I'm going to stitch around the box to attach the zipper. You can use a stitching of between 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch from the edge, as long as you catch your zipper, and stitch all the way around. Try to get a nice clean stitch. Don't trim the zipper, leave the excess on, and just follow the diagram and the pattern, and let's get that step completed. Okay, I have switched onto my zipper foot and I have my needle far right. What I'm going to use as a guide is this edge of my zipper foot. I think that will make it easy for me to keep a straight, even stitch going all the way around. I will need to be moving the zipper out of the way once I get close to this head. It might be a little bit difficult for the foot to pass through. So let's continue on. Oh yes, my stitch length, I'm gonna go the wide one. I'm gonna do this with a 4. Should work pretty good because of this thickness I have. So let's keep going. I'm starting mine at midpoint. I like that better for the bag. And let me just get going here. Take your time, go slow. The slower we go, the better it will be. Oh, this is looking sharp. Okay, let's continue. Okay, now we have our zipper on. Look at that. Now the only thing we need to do is, well, there's a hole back here. We need to put the other piece of the lining onto the pocket. So get your other piece of lining, turn the back over so that you have this facing up, and you're going to just simply place this on top of here, on top of the other one, put some clips in, follow around with clips, and then you will stitch at 3/8 of an inch all the way around. As you're doing this, you're going to have to be moving the back of the bag out of the way. Just hold it together and make sure you get a nice and even stitch, 3/8 all the way around. All right, I have all my pins in, and I'll just be picking this up out of the way as we sew. Don't sew on top of your foam. I am using my regular foot again and going to stitch at 3/8. My stitch length, I think I'll put it about 3.5 now because this is thinner, what we're sewing through. And let's do it. Okay, we now have a pocket with lining. Looks great. And on the back, according to the pattern, I did run that additional stitching around the pocket. So remember to do that. Clean up your piece, cut off any threads, loose ends that you have, and we will get on to the next step, which is going to be attaching the flap. So get your flap ready, clean up this piece. I noticed I've got a little bit of a problem here. There's some sagging. Seems like when I press this with the iron, the foam I'm using shrank a little bit. So I'm going to have to open up this seam over here, this top stitching, and smooth that out because I don't like the way this is, and I don't want to have my bag looking saggy. So I'm also going to fix that. Okay, so that's it. Get your flap ready, and we will continue on with step 9. Why don't you do a read through on that step? It's not too difficult, and we will get to that. Okay, I have my flap in place. I have it tacked down with some clips, and now what we need to do is stitch across the top to attach it onto the bag. We're just tacking it down at this point, but do back stitch at the beginning and at the end. Now is the time, if you want to top stitch your flap, this is the last chance to do that. I've already done it. If you haven't done it, get yours ready and then center it on top of the back of the bag. Make sure that your snap is facing up and stitch across. And then we will continue from there. This is going to be stitched with just a narrow 1/2 centimeter stitch line from the raw edge. Okay, I'm ready to attach the flap. I have put my stitch length at 3.5, and we are going to back stitch in the beginning and just stitch right down. Okay, our flap is attached at this point, and we're going to move on to the next step. If you are going to want to have a brand label attached, sticking out on the outside of your bag, now is the time to put that in place and between these 2 layers that we're going to be working on right now. So what we're going to do to finish this next step is make the bag body. So we'll take the front and back pieces, and with right sides together, we will match up all the sides and pin along these edges here. If you want a label to be sticking outside of the bag, you will need to get that in place. Oh, I'm sorry, you'll need to put that facing inside, decide where you want it, line it up, and then secure it in place. And then when you turn the bag out, you'll be seeing your label sticking outside of the bag. I'm going to put mine on the interior slip pocket or inside the bag somewhere. I'm not going to have it on the outside. And so go ahead and decide on that and get that ready. Let's pin these sides together, and then we're going to go to the machine, and we will be stitching with a 3/8 inch seam allowance all the way around the bag. My piece is now ready to take it over to the machine. I've added in a lot of clips. Since the pocket is sandwiched between here and the flap is sandwiched between here is also, and the flap is also sandwiched inside of here, you might feel like your edges aren't matching up. Just pull on them and make sure that your edges meet. And it's going to be look a little bit full in the middle, but just do that. Once we turn it around, then the bag will relax again. All right, so let's get stitching. We'll be stitching this with a 3/8 seam allowance. Okay, the bag body is now sewed together, and we're going to move on to making the slip pocket. I'm just curious to see, we are going to box out these corners later, but I just want to flip it around real quick to see how this snap lines up, and it lines up pretty well. So I just want to make sure that that meets up. And it does. It's beginning to take shape. Great. Okay, let's move on to the interior slip pocket. Pull out the interior slip pocket piece. Okay, moving on to step 11, page 17. I have already put my brand label on the outside of the pocket. And what we're going to need to do is take this piece, lay it lengthwise, and fold it over, matching up the two shorter edges. And you're going to put clips in, clip around the edges, and you're going to sew around the entire piece, including this edge here. Sew around the entire piece, and then, but leave a gap open at the bottom. Don't sew here. I've already scribbled on it and wrote gap. So leave that open. That's going to be our spot for turning it around. Okay, since we're going to be sewing with a gap, leaving a gap on the bottom, I'm going to start stitching at the gap and work my way around, and I'll stop on the other side of the gap. Okay, so set yourself up with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and we will continue on here. We have our piece ready, and now we are going to clip the corners and turn it out. Turn it through the gap. And then we're going to do a little top stitching around the top edge. So just work through this. And before you pull it all the way out, when the corner is closer to your finger, you know what? I'm going to go back in here, and I use that medium weight interfacing, and I'm feeling that it's not going to allow me to push this out enough, so I'm gonna scale these down a little bit more on every corner because I can feel too much bulk. Go ahead and do that, and just don't cut through the stitches. I think this will lay better. Okay, now, I went a little too far on that one. Okay, so now you can see I've trimmed all these down quite a bit, and now I will attempt to do this again. So I'm gonna go, oh, another thing, get rid of these loose threads so they don't get caught up between the lining, between the pocket. Some of these threads, you might see them on the reverse side. Probably not on mine because it's thicker, but it's always good to get those off. Okay, so go down to one of the deeper corners, use your finger to push that out. See, that works much better now. Use your finger to push that out, and then move to another one. And just work on all these to get them pushed out. These seem to be working better. I am going to stick a tool in there to see if I can get these into a nice shape. That's the idea. You really don't see this pocket that much inside the bag. Here's that gap. We're going to want to close that up by finger pressing. We'll sew it once we're absolutely sure on how it's looking. So if you have a turnout tool, you might want to use that now just to gently push along this edge as I am. Just going to push this out a bit, and then I'll take it over to the board for a nice pressing. Give it a nice pressing. Okay, and then take this to the machine and give it a nice row of top stitching just along this edge. Just like that. Okay, and I'll meet you back here. Okay, we're just gonna run that little 1/8 inch of top stitching across this slip pocket. That's looking nice. Continuing on with the interior slip pocket, take one of your lining pieces, one of the large lining pieces, take your pocket, find the center, and about 6 centimeters down, about 2 3/8 of an inch from the top raw edge, make a line or a marking to guide you, and then carefully line up your pocket, matching the center of the pocket and the center of a lining piece. And this is going to be stitched together. Once you get that together, throw some pins in. We need to make sure we have this perfectly lined up, and add some pins, especially at the top. I like to get the top held down first and use my line as a guide. Now I know this isn't moving, and I can just smooth this out. Mine's dipping a little bit. I don't know what happened here, but I like it. I like the effect, and I really like that. I love this turquoise color. I love the combo on this neutral lining color that I'm using. I'm very happy with the bag. I wonder how yours is turning out. I'll be happy to see some finished bags from this pattern. Share those pictures. Okay, and I should probably throw in another pin up here. Okay, we are very pinned down. And, oh yes, I'm not sewing there, so across the top, very important that. So I can stick in a pin to hold that shut. So now what we're gonna do is, I'm gonna use the same stitch length as this, and we're just gonna go down the pocket, down one side, across, and up the other one. This is also gonna close up that gap. So let's get that done. Okay, here we go. pocket is on. In case you missed the opportunity to put on a label, you could still add one in this area here, and you'll have enough area for your seam allowance. So if you do that, you need to have it about this in this area here. Okay, moving on. Now we are going to make the lining. So this step is the same as step 9, so it should go pretty quick. The only difference is we are leaving a 6-inch gap this time at the bottom. Leave a 6-inch gap. So what you'll need to do is take the front and back pieces with right sides together, match up all the sides, clip it, and leave your 6-inch gap, and we'll move over to the machine. So what we're gonna do is sew from the area of one side of the gap and sew up to one edge and sew the other edge up, leaving the top open. Okay, we are sewing this with the 3/8 seam allowance. However, after I get down a little bit stitching down, I'm going to increase my seam allowance to 1/2 inch, and that will help the bag not to be as excessive fabric inside the bag. That foam we put on takes up some of the space, and so the lining might be a little bit too big and won't lay nicely on the bag. So let's start at 3/8 of an inch, and then we will increase to 1/2 inch. Okay, I'm now at the 1/2 inch. And I'm going to keep that distance, even sewing around the bottom edge. It will help not to have a saggy bottom. I just need to go a little bit more here. Till we get to the gap. And I will back stitch and stop at that point. Clip off our threads. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip the piece over and do the same thing again. I'll be starting at the 3/8 inch and then move over to a 1/2 inch. Now I start to slide over. I am using that seam guide, and it's extremely helpful. If we find that this is saggy, then we'll come back to the machine and we'll take in a little bit more. I went too far. I'm going to back up because we need that gap. One more. We need that gap to have the same measurement, same seam allowance, approaching the gap. Okay. Again, we might have to come back and increase the seam allowance. Okay, let's continue. Okay, I tested how the lining fits inside the main bag, and I decided to go ahead and do another seam allowance, taking in some more on the sides, each side of the lining piece. I started at the top about a 1/2 inch from where this seam is with the bag on the outside, about a 1/2 inch, and then gradually increased. I started on where my first sewing line is, and then I gradually increased going down the bag. Now this is easier when it's not sewn together, and for some reason it just was saggy in the inside. So I'm going to flip this around, I'm going to trim off my seams, flip it around, and close the bottom edge. Okay, we are now on to the next step of boxing the corners on the body and the lining piece. So what you're going to need to do is have the bag inside out, and you're going to want to make a triangle. Look at your diagram on page 19 to guide you down at the bottom. And so what you want to do is make a triangle, having these seams lining up inside the bag. And once you get that lined up, don't worry about squishing down your bag. It'll pop back into shape later. So once you get that nice and even and lined up, you're going to place a ruler measuring centimeters, and we want it to measure 4 centimeters from one edge to the other edge. We're measuring across this way. Once you have that measuring correctly, and you have this 4 centimeters distributed with 2 centimeters on each side of the seam, that's when you want to draw your line and secure this with clips. Then we'll be going over to the sewing machine, and we're going to be stitching right on that line. And you'll back stitch. We need that corner to be strong. It's going to be the bottom of the bag, the exterior, when we turn this out. So make sure that your measurement is exact, that it's straight, and you can, when you stitch, you can push one side of this seam over to reduce some bulk, and you'll do the same on the other corner. Don't cut it off yet. Once we do that, we're going to turn the bag right side out to make sure that the corner did come out nice, and that would give you an opportunity, if you needed to pull out stitching and redo it. So let's get that far. I'm going to show you something real quick. What I'm referring to on that measurement to make sure is, before you cut off, this is what the outside's going to look like. We're creating this right now. It's now changing the shape of the bag. It's making a squared off corner, and now the bag can actually rest. But what we want to make sure about is that this seam, and turning the bag over to the other side, and this seam are the same measurement. That's something we have to achieve. Now you'll notice here is when you push those, make that triangle, you won't see this while you're doing it because the bag is inside out. We want to try to match up these seams. This is what we're trying to match up. It might be a little hard to see this on camera, but just wanted to explain that to you. Okay, so let's move forward with that. So go ahead and get that ready, and we will take it to the machine and stitch it and continue on. We'll be doing the same thing with the lining piece, same procedure. So let's complete step number 13 and keep moving on. Okay, I've completed one corner. I stitched across here and back stitched. I turned it right side out just to see how my corner looks, and it's lining up pretty well. It's practically almost perfect, so that's good. It's bulky, I didn't trim it yet, and now I am going to do my other corner. I was a little bit hesitant to do them both. It's a little bit difficult working with the foam, and I just wanted to make sure. I'll be finishing this other corner, and remember, there's no rush. Just maybe you want to check one corner first to make sure that you have the correct measurements before you do the other corners. So I'm going to move ahead with these. So now that I know that this piece is okay, what you'll be doing is trimming this off at 1/4 inch. So here goes. There's no turning back on this one now. So it's going to end up like that on all your corners. So let's get to that point and meet back here. If you want, run, I'm seeing pulling this, it's kind of pulling apart a little bit on the seam there. So I'm gonna run an extra line. Now that I know that this is the right measurement, I'm gonna run an extra line of stitching on every single corner. So be aware of that. Let's keep going. Okay, I have my two pieces. This is the exterior of the bag, and this is the interior. The only thing I'm missing here is to cut off my corners, which I will do right now. I peeked inside, they're lining up pretty well. So now we will just snip this off. And the other side as well. If you didn't double stitch these edges, go ahead and do that. And I snipped that one off as well. And now what you need to do is turn both pieces inside out. Now that looks good. You can see how my stitching, that it's running in line. This seam runs right into the next one. And on this side, let's see if I was able to achieve that. Yes, this seam is running into the other seam. That's what we're trying to achieve. So now that we have done that, take both pieces to the ironing board, turn out your main bag piece as well. Let's see how this turned out. And yes, my seams are running together. This is bulky, but it doesn't matter. The bag will just be sitting on there. And this seam too is just a tad off, but with the design, you can't tell. And it doesn't really change the look of the shape of the bag. And so now what you need to do is take both pieces over to the ironing board and give these corners a good pressing to set the stitching. Press those out. Once they're pressed, we will continue on. Okay, now our pieces are pressed, and I actually will go over this a little bit more later, but what I really wanted to do was set the corners. So the corners are set, starting to look like a bag. For now, take these two pieces and set them aside. We're gonna start to work on the strap carriers. Now for the strap carriers, you need to cut two pieces of your webbing strap, whatever you chose to use, 4 inches long each. And we're gonna start prepping these, and you're also gonna need your connectors. So get those items ready and make your 4-inch strips, which I had this pre-marked. And the important thing is that these measure the same. Mine is polyester and it tends to unravel a bit, so I'm going to just take a lighter and very quickly go over that edge. Not too much, because you don't want to melt it too much and make it bulky or beat up. So did that. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna thread each piece onto each connector. I think this is my right side up. And I'm just gonna put a clip on there and thread. My connectors definitely have a right side and a wrong side. They're a little bit curved. So the curved part is the right side, and I need to pay attention to that when I am putting these onto the bag. Let's see, I'm gonna go this way. Looks to me like I do have a little bit of a right side and a wrong side with this webbing. I think I have the right side now. And put something on there to hold it together. I've been sewing with beige thread, and now I need to switch out my thread because I don't want the beige to be noticeable on here. I want to use thread the same color as my webbing. I also noticed that my bobbin is starting to run low, so take a peek on yours and make sure that you have enough so you don't run out in the middle of a step. Let's see, so we've got these threaded and folded over and matching up your edges, and you're going to stitch across the bottom raw edge here just 1/2 centimeter. That's like a little bit, like about 1/4 of an inch. So let's stitch across there and get that secured. Okay, so a 1/2 centimeter stitch across. I was feeling a little sure of myself there, and I didn't pin anything, and actually I recommend lining up the edges and put clips here so it's not shifting when you sew. Okay, I want to keep that together. Put this under my foot and continue to secure this. Okay, these are now secured. Okay, now we're going to work with the strap carriers and the exterior of the bag. The strap carriers are going to get sandwiched in between the lining and the exterior of the bag. It'll all make sense further on. What we'll need to do is get the strap carriers put onto the side of the bag, and we need to make some markings before doing that. You will need to have a mark at 2 centimeters below the edge on each piece. That line, you're going to line it up and center it on the side, one on each side of the bag. I've already drawn a mark 2 centimeters down on each connector, and I've made a little mark for where the centers are. That will help for me to line this up with the seam, the side seam. So on your bag, now that we press this, we're going to manhandle it a little bit. So take one carrier and place that 2 centimeter mark. Get this centered. I'm starting at the center and I'm just rolling it up to the 2 centimeter mark. And what you're going to do is put a pin in there to hold that in its place. It's important we get these centered. We don't want it shifting. So I'm just going to put these in here to hold it. And do the same on the other side. Remember, my connector has a right side and a wrong side, so I want the right side going against the bag, because once we get to the point of flipping this around, this strap connector is going to move to a position like this. So same procedure, center it and have the connector sticking out above the edge of the bag by 2 centimeters. Secure that, and then we're going to stitch this down with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This stitch line is going to be hidden once the bag is assembled. You're not going to see it. So just get this attached with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I've removed this from my machine, the base, so I can use this underneath part. Push this under, keeping everything nice and straight, and get it in place with the line. I need to make sure that is lined up. Just want to make sure this is lined up with the edge of my foot, and keeping it in place. We will now stitch that on. Making sure it's only 1/4 of an inch. If you go bigger than that, it's going to show. So stay within the 1/4 inch line. Just like that. And do that again for the other connector. Okay, our connectors are in place, and now we'll be attaching the lining to the body. I did take my lining in an additional 1/8 of an inch just along the sides, not on the bottom. I did a check on that, so if you want to, put your lining inside and line up the side seams and see if there's too much excess fabric. It needs to lay very nicely right along the inside here. So make sure you run that check. So let's just take a little bit of time and match these up. Those are matched. So I'm going to need to pop a pin in there. And then I need to find my center marks here. And I'm just going to take a pen. Since this is going to be right side out, I need a mark on the right side of here. I'm just pinching it together and then just drawing a little line there. And my side seams, those are my other line-up points. You really don't need to mark those because you can see them once this is inside the bag. The important one for me was getting these. And since my seams, I increased those, it was not going to be centered. Okay, so we have the centers on there. And now with your other piece, we need to find the centers as well, which we know where that is on the side seams. We're going to need to squish this down a little bit with the connectors, matching up the side seams. Actually, I'm going to pull these out for a minute and pull this together. And I want to mark my center here. And do the same thing on the other side, matching up the side seams and where that ends up on the side with the flap. I'm just holding this together so I can mark that. Actually, I had a mark there previously, but I'll just make it a little darker now. Okay, so now we have those marked, and we will now we can drop some pins where these marks are. And this will help with the process of lining up the lining. You can match up pins. You can also do it just matching up marks if you're skilled enough to do that. Okay. And now we will nest this together. Again, the flap and the slip pocket need to be on the same side, like so. And just make sure that the right sides are touching each other. And now go around the bag and start to line it up. And while doing so, you can put in some clips to hold this together. This is when you're going to see if your lining piece is too big. I'm going to go around and just go around and line everything up and make sure it's all nice and smooth, that your edges are matching up. You don't want your lining sticking out above the bag. Everything in line. It seems to be all laying nice and flat, so just work at it. And if you're in doubt, just see where pull out the connector so you can see where your side seam is. All right, we have a lot of pins in here and it seems to be laying pretty nice. I'm going to stick in some more. It's always good to put in some extra clips. Okay, and that's how we want to see it. So just take a look around the edge that it's laying down. It's lined up. And I think mine is okay. I think it'll be all right once I get around the edges. So now that we've done that, take your time until you have it just right. This is a very important step. And make sure your flap is down, it's not bunched up. And we are now going to stitch around the top. So now we're going to take the piece to the machine and stitch around the entire outside of the bag using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. On the webbing part, I like to stitch over it twice. So go ahead and take your time and stitch around the top at 3/8 inch seam allowance. The gap will get finished further on, the gap in the lining. Okay, I've got the piece on the sewing plate. I changed my camera a little bit so you could see better. Let's begin. Back stitch. And very important that you are right in line all the time. Take your time, go slow. This pin is going to poke me. So good luck, and here we go. We got that stitched up, and now we need to close up the gap in the bottom of the bag. But before we do that, I want to turn the bag around to see what we just stitched, to see how that's looking. So reach into the bag, and this is called birthing a bag. Reach in and pull it through carefully. You don't want to tear any stitches on that opening. Just work your way through. I did poke myself with a pin when I was at the machine. Okay. And pull these corners out. You can also reach through the gap to push the corners out. And we're still on time for any corrections. Now, just want to tuck this down to get a look at how it's looking. Oh my, this looks nice. I think that's, do you see how that lays really nice? There's no gathering or bunching up. Oh, I think I got that spot on. That's good. If I didn't, I would go back and take it out myself. Okay, what's gonna happen next is we'll be closing the gap and we'll be pressing the bag, and we will be doing top stitching. I'm gonna top stitch all along here. This is when you really want to make sure you have enough thread on your bobbin, so you're just doing one continual stitch all the way around, and you don't have to swap out your bobbin, which would break up your chain of stitching. Well, I think this is looking very nice. I'm very pleased with the result. I hope yours is looking nice also. That's pretty much centered there, and here as well. And then it closes, and we have our connectors on the side. This is where we're going to be putting our strap. I am really liking this bag. It is so cute. Very, very happy with the way it's turning out. So once you're satisfied with the way it looks, you can go back in and you can trim some of the seams in the inside to reduce some of the bulk if necessary. If not, you don't have to. I do not trim off the webbing. I leave it long. I leave it long, and it seems to work better that way. It lays nicer against the bag, and we can get a nice top stitching also. I don't trim the webbing. Before we stitch up the gap, you do have a chance to correct anything that you might see is wrong, that didn't turn out well. So if that's the case, you can pull the bag out, pull this out, bring the bag back out again through the gap, and make any adjustments that you find is necessary. Otherwise, we're going to give the bag a good pressing. Go ahead and cut off any bulk that you have in the inside that you want to cut off. I'm not cutting off. I do recommend that you do not cut off, as I mentioned before, the excess tab that's sticking out. Just leave it the way it is. And then give your bag a good pressing, and we will move on from there. Okay, now we're going to close up the bottom of the lining, and I have made a mark where my other sewing stopped, and then we left the gap, and then I made a mark here on the other end. And I'm going to sew this with a very, very small seam allowance. Top stitching, I'm going to use my narrow zipper foot because I just want to catch the edge as close as I can to catch the edge. Okay, now that we've stitched closed the gap in the bottom of the bag, now we need to give this a very nice pressing. We're going to go on to the step. What we're going to do next is we're going to be top stitching all around the bag. That way everything will be held together. The lining will be then sewn to the main part of the bag. I'm happy with the way mine is lining up, and all we need to do now is take this to the ironing board, press this really nicely down, and you might want to put in some clips here to hold it all together until we get to the machine and finish up by top stitching. So let's get it pressed and get the clips in, get it all held together, and get it ready to go to the machine. Okay, I have my pins in to start this next step, doing the top stitching. I've changed my foot out to a walking foot. It'll help to feed the fabric through evenly because it has extra feed dogs on the top. So that will help to push these extra thick layers through the machine. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I am going to start the sewing on the inside of the bag at the front of the bag, because that's where I'm going to end up doing some back stitching, and as you're using the bag and opening it up, you won't see where those stitches overline as much as you would if you start in the back part of the bag. So let's get started, and take your time, go slow and go carefully, stitch by stitch. Okay, we have completed step number 18. You should have your bag now all the way top stitched and completed. And now we can move on to making the strap and attach it. So what you're going to need for this step is you're going to need your leftover webbing. We already cut off 8 inches using 4 inches for each connector. So you should have a piece at 55 inches. Again, you can make any adjustments to if you want it longer. I'm happy with the 55 inches. So what you want to do is mark one side of your strapping as the wrong side, and just stick a piece of tape on. We're going to take that off later. Okay, to make things a little bit easier, it might be a little bit confusing reading this. It's, I think, better just to watch how I'm doing this. Get your straps and mark one end with a piece of tape so we know that that's the wrong side of the strap. So on the other end of the strap, get your ruler and you're going to make 2 markings from the edge. From the edge, a marking at 1 inch, and from the edge, a marking at 3 3/4. That will help the process. Take your slider, feed it through, and now those marks are visible. And what you need to do is, on the 1 inch mark, fold it over, and then bring that up to the other mark, 3 3/4. You should have enough room to get through with your foot of your sewing machine. And from here, you'll want to secure this, making a line at 3/8 of an inch from the bottom, and also securing the bottom edge as well. So go ahead and do that, and you can also use some double-sided tape if that would make it easier for you. You can stick a piece in there so that way this stays in place. So let's get that stitched down. Okay, now we're just going to stitch this down. I want to get this under the foot. I'm sewing the 3/8 inch first, and then I'll sew the narrow edge. So I'm going to sew this part first. Okay, and now we will do the other stitch. That is right across the edge here. I'm just going to trim this up a little bit. I'm just going to check it before I stitch down the other edge to make sure that when you see it this way, you're not seeing anything popping out like the bottom part. So I want to line this up now, and that way I'll get it perfectly aligned. So this one we want to sew really close to the edge, and I'm just going to shift my needle over a bit and tack it down there. Okay, now we have our 2 rows of stitching, and I'll just take my snippers and clean this up a little bit, and we'll continue on. Okay, now that we've tacked down the slider, we can now feed the strap through the bag, through the connectors to make it adjustable. You'll first want to mark your piece, the end piece that doesn't have the slider on it, and you're going to make 2 markings. One will be at 1.5 inches from the raw edge, and another one will be 3 3/4 from the raw edge. Now, before you feed this through, you need to decide if you usually wear your bags on your right shoulder or your left shoulder. I wear mine on my left shoulder, and I'm going to feed it based on that. So I will take the strap and feed it through my slider, feed it through the connector, and then with the connector face up, I'll slip the loose end under and bring it through the other slot. Pull on it to shorten the strap, and then on the other end, make sure it's not twisted, feed it through the other connector, fold over to the first mark, and then bring it up to the other mark and secure in place with a couple clips. And now you have the strap secured with the clips. You need to take this piece to your machine and stitch it down like we did previously on the slider, making a stitch at 3/8 in from the folded edge, and then tack down the other edge. Okay, we now have both ends secured, attached. Clean up any loose threads you might have, and now we can remove this piece of tape. We no longer need that. And congratulations, you finished your So Fancy messenger bag. You're really going to love using this bag. I'm sure you'll get a lot of wear out of it. It also makes a great gift, and also you can sell them. So enjoy your bag, and thank you for joining me in this tutorial. There's more to come.